Hello, thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to play Sid Meier's Civilization, the board game, along with both expansions incorporated, so Fame and Fortune and Wisdom and Warfare. I should note that this is the 2010 version of the game, not the 2002 that shares the same name. I'm not going to be going into the setup of the game, but I will be showing different shots of the game set up to illustrate the different pieces. Just like in the video game, there's multiple ways to win. The first way is through a culture victory. You have to move up the culture track here by spending culture and trade. The second way to win is through a tech victory. The first player that researches spaceflight wins the game immediately. The third way to win is an economic victory. You achieve that by collecting 15 coins, which are tracked here on this dial. Finally, the fourth way to win is through a military victory, which is achieved by conquering another player's capital city. As you start the game, you will have your civilization sheet, your starting government, your starting terrain tile, and each civilization has their own unique one. Your capital city, a scout unit, an army unit, and your investment cards. Additionally, all players start with 4 double-sided social policy cards. These provide additional options for each individual player. Your social policy maximum is equal to the number of your built cities. So starting off the game, because you have 1 city, you will get to immediately adopt one of the social policies. As the game continues, whenever you build a new city, you get to adopt another one up to a maximum of 3. Normally, once a social policy is adopted, it cannot be changed. There are, however, certain effects, such as the bureaucracy tech, that will allow you to switch a currently adopted social policy to a different social policy. I should note, you can never have the social policies from both sides of the card. Only one side can be face up at a time. Your capital has to start on one of the 4 inside squares. There is a recommended spot for first-time or inexperienced players. Your 2 figures have to start in any outskirt spot. That's any of the 8 adjacent locations, not including water. You can start on the same or different spots. Your civilization sheet will also tell you your starting technology. It will form the beginning of your tech pyramid, which we'll talk more about later in this video. During the start of turn phase, a player may choose to invest 1 and only 1 coin on an investment card. In order to do so, they have to discard a coin token. So you cannot use coins printed on the map, on tech cards, or on buildings. The token is discarded, and you lower your coin total on your dial. Then you take an investment token and choose which card you wish to invest it on. The more coin investment tokens you invest on a card, the greater the bonus it will give you. Investment tokens do not count towards the 15 coins needed for an economic victory. Each turn is made up of 5 different phases: start of turn, trade, city management, movement, and research. Once you've gotten through all 5, you go back up and start again and continue until somebody meets one of the win conditions. During the start of turn phase, the first player marker is passed to the left. Then the new first player performs any start of turn actions, which are usually found either on wonders or cultural event cards, like this one here. Builds any new cities, and changes governments if desired. Once the first player has completed all those steps, it passes to the next person, until everyone has done their start of turn phase. During the start of turn phase, if a player is not already at their maximum amount of cities, which normally is 2, unless you have the irrigation tech, then it's 3, you may build 1 or more new cities on the map as long as it doesn't bring you above your limit. Now, to do so, you have to have a scout figure where you're going to be building your new city. There are some restrictions. You cannot build a city on a water space. There have to be 8 revealed squares adjacent to the square where you're building, so you could not build on the edge of the map or next to an unrevealed tile. It cannot be adjacent to a hut or a village token. So if the token was still on here, I could not build a city here, but because the token is gone, this would be a legal spot. It can also not be adjacent to an enemy figure. Doesn't matter if it's an army unit or a scout. It can be adjacent to friendly figures. You could even have one of your figures in the same spot as the scout. And the city outskirts are not allowed to overlap any other city outskirts. So there's going to have to be at least 3 squares away from an existing city. If it meets all those requirements, you can sacrifice the scout, put it back into your supply, and put a city tile unwalled side up. This city starts generating trade and production right away. The final optional step during the start of turn phase is changing government types. Governments are unlocked through researching specific technologies. If you had unlocked a government this previous turn, you can switch to it at no penalty. If it's been a turn or two, or you're switching over to a government type that you unlocked in a previous turn, instead you have to go to Anarchy for the rest of this turn, and then the next turn you can switch over to a new government type. Anarchy prevents your social policies from having effects, and you're not allowed to take any actions with your capital. The second phase is the trade phase. All players will simultaneously tally up how much trade they produce. You look in all of the outskirts of your cities, and each trade symbol gets added up, as well as any spots that contain your scouts. And then you mark the tally on your trade dial here. Trade can be saved from turn to turn. Squares in a city's outskirt that contain enemy units are unable to produce anything. After players have tallied up their trade, they may then negotiate and or trade with other players. You may make non-binding promises. You may trade points of trade, unspent culture tokens, resource tokens, or culture event cards. Items other than that are not allowed to be traded unless a specific card or ability allows you to do so. The third phase is the city management phase. In player order, each player will get to take one action with each of their cities. They can do one of 4 things: produce a figure, unit, building, or wonder, devote to the arts, harvest a resource, or start a building program. To produce a figure, unit, building, or wonder, you first need to calculate how much production a city has. You count up the number of production symbols in the city outskirts. Each scout that you have on the board is allowed to send the production from that tile to one city, so it cannot supply multiple cities with 2 production. You cannot produce or get production from any location that has an enemy figure. You are also allowed to rush production with trade. For every 3 points of trade that you spend, you increase your production by 1. Any production not spent with this action is lost. It cannot be saved for a future turn. The two types of figures that can be produced are army figures and scout figures. Army figures cost 4 production and are the only figures that can fight battles and explore huts and villages. Scout figures cost 6 production. They can be used to build new cities or gather extra trade, production, or other resources for a city. Scouts are not allowed to enter squares containing huts or villages and are killed immediately if they are attacked by an army unless they are protected by an army of their own. When you build a figure, it has to go in a city outskirts space. You can put multiple figures into the same location as long as it does not exceed your stacking limit. And you are not allowed to place into the water unless you have a tech that allows your units to end their movement on a water space. Infantry, artillery, and mounted units are unlocked and able to be produced at the beginning of the game. Aircraft units require you to research the flight technology before you're able to build them. The cost to build a unit is tied to the rank that you have unlocked for that type of unit. So in this example, green has level 2 rank for infantry and level 1 for artillery and mounted, and does not yet have the aircraft unlocked. So to produce an infantry, you'd have to spend 7 production, whereas to produce an artillery or a mounted unit, it would only cost 5. Aircraft always costs 12. You produce a unit, you will take the top card from that deck and put it into your standing forces deck. You start the game with 1 infantry, 1 artillery, and 1 mounted unit in that deck. Buildings are constructed in city outskirt locations. You can only build a building if you have researched the tech that unlocks that specific building. Most of the buildings have a basic and a more advanced version as well. Buildings can only go on certain types of terrain. For example, the trading post can only be built in the desert. The barracks/academy can be built on any terrain except for water, and so on. Buildings with a star in the corner are considered limited buildings. You are only allowed to have 1 limited building per city. When a city outskirts location is covered by a building, it no longer produces the symbols shown on that spot. So if I put this building here, instead of getting 2 production, I would get +2 to my military strength and get 2 trade instead. If you have the masonry tech, you may build city walls around 1 or more of your cities. City walls are like any other building, except instead of putting a building tile, it's considered to be part of the city center, and you flip over your city to show the higher value of defense. Producing wonders. Players will have 4 face-up wonders they can choose to produce as one of their city actions. Reminder that the city that is producing the wonder has to pay the full cost by itself. You cannot take production from one city and use it to help construct a wonder in another city. Each wonder has a card and a piece that goes onto the board. The card will have the name, the era of the wonder's ability, and the cost. Some wonders will give you a discount if you have a specific technology unlocked. Once you've produced a wonder, you take the card and put it face up in front of you as a reminder of its action, and put the tile in the city outskirts of the city that's produced it. Wonders, like limited buildings, can be placed on any terrain except for water and are restricted to 1 per city. A city, however, can have both a wonder and a limited building. It's important to note that wonders are not considered buildings, so if a card references buildings, it does not apply to your wonders. Certain tech cards allow a player to obsolete a wonder, removing its special ability for the rest of the game. A player can also choose to replace one of their existing buildings or wonders when placing a new building or wonder. The new building or wonder has to be able to go into the spot where the old one was located. If a wonder is made obsolete, its card is flipped over and it no longer provides a special ability for the rest of the game. However, the marker stays on the board and still will produce culture for that city. The second type of action that a player can take with a city is to devote the city to the arts. When you do this, a player collects one culture token from the stockpile, plus one for each additional culture icon in the city outskirts. Scouts can also send back culture icons. At any point during a player's city management phase, they may choose to spend their culture tokens to move up the culture track. The cost to move up is shown above each section of the culture track, and the higher levels will require you to spend trade as well as culture tokens. You are allowed to move up as many spaces as you can afford or as you want. When you move to a new space, you get the reward of that space. Rewards can be great people or culture event cards. You reach the final space of the culture track, you win the game through a cultural victory. Great people. If you get a great person, you flip over the top card of the great person deck, and it will tell you what type of great person you are getting. In this case, a great general. As long as there's a great general token left, you take the token and the card. If there were no more great generals left, this card would be discarded and you would flip over the next card until you get a card that matches a symbol or a token that is still left. Your great person has to go in a city outskirt and gives you some sort of bonus. In this case, +4 to your military strength. A card also gives you an ability. These are kept hidden until they are used. A lot of them require you to discard the card to use it. You cannot use the ability on a card if you do not have that type of great person remaining on the board. If a player loses their great person token from the board, they have to check their great person cards to make sure they don't have too many cards of that type. If this was my only great general, I would not be allowed to have any great general cards in my hand. I'd have to discard it. If I had 2 great generals and I lost one, I'd have to discard down to 1 great general card. There are 3 different culture event card decks, one for each of the 3 sections of the culture track. Your standard hand size for culture event cards is 2. However, these symbols increase your hand size by 1 for each of these symbols that you have. Culture event cards will have their name, when they can be played, and what they do. If you choose to replace your great person marker with a new one, instead of losing your old marker, it goes into your supply and you can choose to place it into a new location. Different than buildings and wonders. At the start of turn phase, you can place any reserved great person tokens into city outskirts location. The third type of action that a city can do is harvest a resource from the map. In order to do so, the resource has to be in your city outskirts. So the city here has a silk and an incense. Scouts can also send back a resource to be harvested. So right here. Each city may only harvest 1 resource, even if they have multiple symbols in their city outskirts. Resources are used to power resource abilities found on tech cards. So for example, horseback riding here requires you to spend a silk to activate this ability during the trade phase. The 4th city action is to start a building program. To do so, place a building program marker on the city. The next time that city produces a unit, a figure, a building, or a wonder, discard the token and double the amount of production for that city. That also includes production sent in by a scout. A city cannot have more than one building program marker at a time, and it will stay there until it is used or the city is destroyed. Any excess production after you've produced the figure, unit, or building, or wonder is wasted. The fourth phase is movement. Each player in turn order is able to move all of their units one at a time. Units can move up to a number of squares equal to their civilization's travel speed, which is a base of 2. It can be increased by certain texts. Figures are not allowed to move diagonally. Once a figure has started moving, it has to finish its movement before a different unit can be moved. A player can move several of their figures as a group if they all begin the movement phase in the same square. Doing so can offer extra strength in battle or allow armies to protect scouts, like here. Figures that begin in the same square are allowed to go different directions. They don't have to move together. However, you can never have more figures, armies, and scouts combined in a single square higher than your stacking limit. It starts off at 2 but can be increased by certain texts. At the start of the game, figures are not allowed to enter water spaces. Certain texts can allow your figures to do so, and other more advanced texts will even allow you to end your movement on a water space. A player may discover a face-down map tile by spending 1 square of movement when one of their figures is next to a face-down map tile. Instead of moving on to that tile, the unit stays where it was, the figure stays where it was, and the tile is flipped over, and the white arrow points away from that figure. Once the tile is flipped, players will need to populate it with any tokens that are required. In this case, 2 villages. Only armies are allowed to explore huts and villages. An army figure that moves into a space with either immediately stops its movement and resolves. If it's a hut, the active player will secretly look at what's on the other side. If it's a resource, they get to keep it face down and spend it when they choose. If it's not a resource, it needs to be resolved immediately. In this case, it's a city-state, which we'll talk about in a minute. If a player moves onto a village, it attempts to repel the invading civilization. The player to the left will function as the barbarians and conduct a battle against this player. If the player wins, then they get to take the piece and secretly look at it. Once again, if it's a resource, they keep it, otherwise they resolve it. If they lose, their figure is destroyed and the village would stay put. The barbarians always fight with 1 infantry, 1 artillery, and 1 mounted unit, and they're always at level 1. If the city-state token is revealed, player will take a random city-state and place it in that location. They offer different bonuses, and as long as a player has a unit on top of it, it's considered to be in the outskirts of that person's capital. So this city-state will give +2 in combat and give a culture icon if a city is devoted to the arts. It also provides a small bonus of +4 if green is defending this location from an enemy attack. If a player moves their figure off of a city-state, it is considered abandoned and no longer provides bonuses to that player. It still, however, continues to exist, and another player can move onto it and occupy it instead. Players can also build cities on the same square as a city-state. If that happens, the city-state is destroyed and the player gets 3 culture. Players are not allowed to build adjacent to city-states. Players are allowed to move their figures through their city centers. Scouts may enter enemy city outskirts, but never enemy city centers. Enemies that enter enemy city center immediately start a battle. You are allowed to disband your units. In order to do so, your figure must be on top of one of your cities and end its movement there. If you do that, you remove it from the board, and if it's a scout, you place a caravan marker. If it's an army that you disband, you place a fortification marker. You are only allowed to have one marker of either type on a city at a time. The fortification marker provides a +2 to combat the first time that this city is attacked. The caravan marker will give that city 2 additional production when you choose to use it. The fifth and final phase is the research phase. This is when all players, if able, are able to research one tech card. Players may only do so if they have enough trade and they have a legal spot in their tech pyramid. Level 1 techs require 6 research. Level 2 require 11, and so on. When researching a tech, a player spends all of their trade. The only exception to this is for every coin that a civilization has, they get to save that much trade if they had left over. So if this player researched a level 1 tech, normally they would spend all 9, but because they have 2 coins, they would get to keep 2 trade for the next round. In addition to having enough trade, players need to have a valid location in their tech pyramid to research new technology. Level 1 techs always go on the first row, level 2 techs always go on the second row, and so on. Level 2 tech needs to have 2 level 1 techs to be placed. To place a second level 2 tech, I would need a total of 3 level 1 techs to support the pyramid. Once I have 2 level 2 techs, then I can do a level 3, and so on. One exception is a player's starting technology always goes on the bottom row, even if it is not a level 1 tech. Player researches the level 5 spaceflight tech, they immediately win the game through a technological victory. Unlocked tech cards give benefits to the player who researches it. Benefits could be things like certain items for production, upgrading existing items or abilities, or providing new abilities. The Navy card here gives a new ability and also allows this player to build the shipyard. Horseback riding increases your travel speed and gives a new triggerable ability if you spend a silk during the trade phase. Logistics upgrades all 3 of these types of units, so the infantry, the artillery, and the mounted units, making them stronger but also more expensive. Anytime a unit is upgraded, all of your existing units of that type are considered to be upgraded up to that level. So next time this player fights a battle and they flip over an infantry unit, it comes up as a level 2 instead of level 1 that they had purchased it at. Some technologies will upgrade buildings. For example, banking allows players to build a bank instead of the lesser form, the market. If this player already had a market built, or multiple markets built, they would immediately get flipped over to the bank side. Resource abilities can only be used once per turn, even if a player has multiples of that resource. The agriculture tech allows a player to grow their capital into a metropolis. So instead of taking up 1 space on the board, it takes up 2. It now has larger city outskirts, has a greater defensive bonus, and it produces 2 culture instead of 1 when this city is devoted to the arts. Part of a metropolis can be placed onto a water space, as long as the water space is not on the edge of the board. In doing so, this space is no longer considered a water space, so units can move through it even without technology that allows players to move through water. If the metropolis extends onto a spot that contains a building or a wonder, that building or wonder is destroyed. This is a combat card. It has the name, the strength value, the health value, the type of unit that it trumps, the unit type, and the rank. Battle begins when a player's army figure moves into a square containing a village, an enemy army, or an enemy city. At the start of a battle, both the attacker and the defender shuffle their standing forces and draw a number of unit cards equal to their battle hand size randomly. The player's battle hand size starts at 3, but may be increased through a couple different methods. Hand size is increased by 2 for each friendly army figure in the same square beyond the first one. Hand size is increased by 1 if that player has fundamentalism as their government type, and the player hand size is increased by 3 if the player is defending a city or a capital. Next, the players will look to see if either side has any combat bonuses, which are shown by these orange exploding stars. Those bonuses can be obtained through barracks, academies, great generals, and defense of cities. Players will each add up their total bonus and calculate the difference. So if one player had a bonus of 12 and the other had a bonus of 8, the first player would receive a combat bonus card turned to the +4 side. Starting with the defender and going back and forth, each player must play a unit from their battle force face up on the table until both players have played all of their units in their battle force. The only exception is if the attacker is attacking a walled city, the attacker has to play first instead of the defender. The first unit placed creates what's called the first front. After that, each player, when they place a unit, has to either start a new front or join an existing front. There be more than one unit per side in an existing front. When a card is placed into an existing front, both cards will immediately attack each other, dealing their attack damage against the health of the opposing card. If the damage dealt is less than the health, that card would take wound markers equal to the damage dealt and would remain. However, this catapult would destroy this archer, doing 2 damage against the 1 health, so the archer card would be removed. With the exception of the aircraft, each unit type can trump one other unit type and gets trumped by another unit type. In this case, the knight, the mounted unit, trumps artillery units, the catapult. What this means is that the knight does all of his damage and resolves it before this catapult gets to attack back. So normally, if these were the same type of unit, this 4 damage would destroy this 4 health, and this 2 damage would destroy this 2 health, so these cards would knock each other out. But because this one trumps, it does the 4 damage to this one and knocks it out before it can do any damage back. Cards will have resource abilities that are used during battle. They're always activated before or after attacking an enemy front, never during, even though the effect may last through an attack. After both players have placed all of their battle forces, the battle is over. Before wound tokens are removed, these here, from the surviving units in the battle, each player adds together the health values of all their surviving units. So green here would have a health value of 2, red health value of 4. Then you subtract the total number of wound tokens on your surviving units, add the value of the combat bonus card, if you're the player with it, and determine who has the higher combat value. The player with the highest total is the winner, and ties go to the defender. So in this case, Green here would have 2 minus 1 for 1, plus 4, bringing their total to 5. Red would have 4 minus 2 for a total of 2, so green would be the winner. Any units that are destroyed in a battle are discarded back to the supply. Any units that survive go back to the player's standing army deck. All wound tokens are removed at the end of the battle. They don't carry over into the next battle. Or after the battle, the loser loses all of their figures that were on that spot. The winner loses 1 figure for every 2 units that they lost during that battle, but they get to keep 1 no matter what. The winner gets a certain amount of loot depending on what they defeated. So if they defeated a figure, they gain 1 loot. If they defeated a city, they gain 2 loot. And if they defeated a capital city, they win the game through military victory. Loot is then spent for rewards. If a player has 1 loot, they can either take 3 trade, take 3 culture, take 1 resource, or the loser has to discard 1 coin token. If the winner has 2 loot, they can copy a tech, steal a culture event, or steal 1 coin token. If they have 2 loot, they can also choose to take level 1 loot twice. It can be the same or it can be different. If a player defeats a non-capital city, all buildings and wonders in its city outskirts are removed. Any great people would go back to the player who owned that city. Thanks for watching my how to play video for Sid Meier's Civilization the board game with both expansions. Hope it's been helpful, and get out and play a game of it soon.